Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry P. Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. Also at the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, check out the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, The Larry P. Arnn Show, and more, all at podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt in Studio North, live on this Friday. The Hillsdale Dialogue is underway. Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, joins me. Good morning, President Arnn. How are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
I am great. Are you taking any time off this summer? Are you going motorcycling again, or are you done with motorcycling?
I'm done with it for the time being, but also I'm too busy now. I've got a crazy life.
Even in the summer?
Yeah. It's terrible. It's a little quieter. We just got back from a cruise, and I got to go to Israel, which I love, and I also walked up the Acropolis. So
oh,
I'm
my
busy with
goodness.
things like that. But we had 570 of our closest friends on this cruise.
Oh, you know, I love cruises, but I normally have between 50 and 100 people with me, and I find that I'm exhausted at the end because I want to talk to each of them, and they all want to talk to me, and I try and get that done. How do you handle 570 people?
Well, at some point the problem becomes too large to solve, and so I talk to a lot of them. And we have cruise lines, or maybe it'll be better next year, but they're back at work now, but they don't like sea days. They stop in ports. And our best days are sea days because we have speakers. We have Victor Hansen, and we have Chris Caldwell, and we have Molly Hemingway and Mark Hemingway. We had a great group, and, you know, I gave some talks. And so those are very popular. And that's the main way you do those talks, and then there's Q&A, and then people talk about them for 24 hours or more.
That is, by the way, the essence of a great cruise, is sea days, because you are absolutely right. We used to take David Allen White along with us, and they'd come to hear me, but they'd go to applaud David. So your best speaker always gets the most applause, like King for a Day. I never liked that in King for a Day, because I was never a Queen for a Day. I was never going to win. But who won, excluding present company? Who gets the most popular response?
Well, Victor Hansen's a show pony, and
yeah.
I forgot to name him. And he's great. You know, he's very wise. And Chris Caldwell talked about Ukraine, and what else did he talk about? But they were both very controversial subjects. And there was, Israel, Israeli politics. Israel's, as you know, probably in a mess, and huge political fight underway, and it's a little bit like America. In fact,
it's a fight over their court. It's interesting.
Yeah, it
Yesterday,
is.
I talked to Leader McConnell.
The one side, one part of which is certainly dishonest, I think. One side says you have to have an independent court to protect property rights, independent of the political process, and that's the tech companies, which have enormous prestige in Israel. It's a kind of a phenomenon that I haven't seen before, but I see it there. And it's just talking to people, what they all say. And I should interject that I love that place, and I spent a lot of time there with Martin Gilbert, and there's no greater place to go, in my opinion, than to walk through the Jaffa Gate on the western side of the old city and walk in that city, because it's the ancient world. You can walk right into it. And so it's a wonderful place, and it's, you know, very great. They're not like us. They're small and isolated. And so if the mighty tech companies give them favor and give them jobs, and Israeli tech companies do a lot of business with Microsoft and Google and all of them, that has enormous prestige. And the tech companies, who are not known for their vast conservatism, have intervened in this argument to say that we have to have an independent court to protect our property rights, or else we can't invest in Israel. And everybody that I talk to in Israel repeats that line. So that's on the one hand, right? And certainly there must be independent courts. The claim of the Netanyahu administration is that they have a commission system of some kind for nominating, for placing people on the Supreme Court, I do believe. And that system has existing members of the Supreme Court, I think 2 on it, and members of the Bar Association who are voting members. And that means that maybe the judges are in a position to succeed, to appoint their successors, or at least have heavy influence on it. And that smacks of oligarchy.
Oh, Dr. Arnn, Michael Arnn comes on almost weekly, former ambassador of Israel to the United States, former deputy minister in the last Netanyahu government, not this one. And he always points out to me that only in Israel do the people have no voice in the selection or confirmation of justices. In the United States, we get 2 choices. We get to vote on the president, we get to vote on our senators, and they, and as a republic should, have the power to dispose of that power once they get it, but not in Israel. That system has got to be fixed because it's a self-perpetuating oligarchy.
That's it, and so you've been talking to a guy who knows all about it, whereas I've just been there. But and if you make that point, and oddly enough, everybody wants to talk about that. So if you make the point, okay, yeah, but what is the ultimate source of their authority? Where do they get it? And the answer is the American Constitution is infinitely better than the semi-non-existent Israeli Constitution.
There is no Israeli Constitution. They have the basic law, which is just a statute. And that's all it is. It's just a statute.
Yeah, and, the people who founded Israel, I used to work with Martin Gilbert, and he was a historian of all that. I learned a lot about it. And they were awesome people. But they should have spent 5 years learning everything in the Federalist Papers before they started that place. Because, proportional representation, it's always very divided. David Ben-Gurion himself never got an absolute majority in the Knesset, the parliament they call it. And so it's always coalition. And the claim these days, Israel is becoming more religious because lots of the immigrants are coming for religious reasons. The latest waves, by the way, are Russians who don't want to serve in the Ukraine war, so they say. And there's a lot of immigration. When I first went to Israel, this is in like 1977, there were 3.5 million Israelis. In fact, there were about as many Jews living in New York State as there were in Israel. Now it's about to cross 10 million. It's still growing very fast. And it's vibrant, to go there is, in my opinion, a very great delight, even if you have arguments with people.
Oh, my goodness, yes. I've only been there twice, and on both occasions, actually I've been there 3 times. 2 out of the 3, I went into the tunnels next to the Western Wall. I don't know if you got to do that, but I think that takes you to the most sacred place on earth, which is, you don't actually go into the Holy of Holies, but you're standing parallel to it, and there's a synagogue down there. Have you been able to do that ever?
Oh, yeah, the other day. Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
You're right about that. And it's funny because it's basically an outdoor place. It's the Western Wall, is the western boundary of the Temple Mount, which is now populated by mosques. And it's very difficult to get permission to go up there. It didn't used to be. I've been up there many times, but hard now. But at the left or northern end of the Western Wall, the wall recedes under a great arch supporting things up above it, very large area, and it's sort of semi-indoor. It's open at one end, and there's bookshelves and prayer books and all kinds of things, and there are people inside there, very tightly packed, praying in there, and then along the Western Wall, on the outside part, there's a division between the men and the women. The women are on the right and the men are on the left. Apparently, only men go in that enclosed space. And it's remarkable to go in there, of course.
Yeah, I look at those blocks, those massive, massive marble stones that were erected for the first temple and remain for the second temple, and I'm just amazed at what the Israelites did in the ancient world. I really am. It's pyramid-level construction. Yeah,
well, the Israelites and, of course, a lot of other people, too. I'm told, I've not been there, that Damascus is an older city on the average than the old city of Jerusalem. But one corner of the old city of Jerusalem, David did some construction there, and so that's quite some time ago. And so the whole thing, it's divided into quarters. The Franciscans, their quarter is called the Christian quarters. There's a Franciscan order that was devoted to the preservation and restoration of the Holy Land, and they've done massive work there.
Someday they're going to let me broadcast from Israel, and maybe you'll go along with me. I'll be right back with Dr. Larry Arnn. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Dr. Larry Arnn is the president of Hillsdale College. Everything Hillsdale is found at hillsdale.edu, including the application that you'd better get in early because I'm going to guess they're going to cross the 10-to-1 ratio this year. How are applications running as Hillsdale continues to be the lantern of the North and maybe the last best hope for American higher ed?
Well, it's hot. We're going to have a good year. I think this class is better. We're at the point now where only small steps are possible, but I think the average, grade point average and ACT of our incoming class is huge and, bigger than ever. What does that mean? That means 3.94, I think, entering grade point average, and 32.5 maybe average ACT. So that's all pretty high. The main thing is we're turning down several hundred that are hard to distinguish from the ones we take, and I give advice about that. I'll give it on the radio. If you want to get into Hillsdale College, prepare your arguments and make the case that you actually desperately want to do this, because that's so important. Intellect matters very much, but character matters at least as much. And
energy matters. I mean, you just can't mail it in.
It's hard. The college, Hillsdale College is difficult, right? You got to read everything under the sun and study all the sciences and math, and it will transform you if you do it seriously. And if you don't do it seriously, you can't do it at all. And so what we're trying to find out is who really urgently wants to do this, and we are blessed with a superabundance of people who do.
A couple of presidents ago,
success rates.
A couple of presidents ago at Harvard, Drew Gilpin-Faust made a comment. We could fill the entire incoming class with valedictorians, and I think Hillsdale could do the same thing. But that's not what you're looking for, because valedictorians look backwards. You're looking forwards.
Yeah, the most important thing, these court cases that we're going to talk about, they all involve the nature of the human being. And human beings are, to a different extent than anything in nature, self-motivated. Their choices are extremely important to them. And everything they do, including especially their learning, comes from them. And so young people listening to this, they should know that you can form your character and your intellect to a high state by your own effort, and that can only be done by your effort. And so, higher education is for studying higher things. And so if you want that, you should prepare yourself, because it'll change your life in decisive and wonderful ways. But it isn't easy, and it takes years of commitment beyond the 4 years of, I will say, in August when they show up. To the freshmen, I will say, it's foolish for you to be sitting in this room unless you intend to keep up this kind of work for the rest of your life.
Amen. I have been reading, and we're going to return. I want to assure my audience we're returning this book, The World Crisis, next week. People tuned in today expecting The World Crisis. They get that next week. We're going to be there for 20 weeks. And, I'm 67 years old. I have not read this book this way before. It came out in 1925, so it's 100 years old almost. And you got to keep working, or you're just going to miss everything.
Yeah, and the bad news is that your life runs out at an accelerating pace as you get older. But the good news is, learning, it accretes. What you already know is a great help to learning more. This was a great theme of the very great Winston Churchill all his life. He says, he gave a great speech about education. He says, in Miami in 1946, he says, I want to say a word for the late learners. He said, if you reach an age where you have a chance to address yourself to the classics, that will be rich and will change your life, and in some ways more than it can for a young person who are really, they have the energy and the curiosity and the naivete and the ingenue nature that makes it perfect, right? They're going to show up nervous and embarrassed and afraid, and they're going to use that to grow very fast. But then later, after they know more, by the time they're seniors, they think they own the place, and they do. But what about the time they're senior citizens? Then what can they have done by that time?
Then they go on the cruises, and they go to Israel, and that's what they learn. I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere, America. Dr. Larry Arnn and I are going to talk about affirmative action and the Supreme Court current term just completed, picking up on where I left off with Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell yesterday. The court is working well for the first time in the 40 years that I've been a licensed lawyer. It's working as it should, and we'll talk about that when we return.
As a Hillsdale podcast listener, you know that our great nation was founded on the principle that all men are created equal. But far too many of our nation's colleges and universities, including those in the Ivy League, insist on using race as a factor for admissions. The Supreme Court recently decided a case on this very subject. But there's a unique American college that doesn't discriminate based on race. It never has and never will. It's us. Hillsdale College. Hillsdale was founded in 1844 to educate all persons, irrespective of nationality, color, or sex. We continue that policy today, admitting students on the strength of their character, ability, and intentions, not their heritage or background. Larry P. Arnn, Hillsdale's president, had an article published in the Wall Street Journal explaining the college's colorblind policies and its related refusal of government funding, even indirectly in the form of federal student aid. You can read it for yourself at hillsdale.edu/equal. And after you read it, you may even want to support us with a tax-deductible gift. So please, read Dr. Arnn's article at hillsdale.edu/equal. You also can text EQUAL to 71844 right now for a link to the free article.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. On Tuesday of this week, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell put an op-ed into the Washington Post saying, look at the court. Only 5% of its decisions were 5-4. Only 9% were 6-3. It is not partisan. It is originalist. Then Ruth Marcus, my friend at the Post, but a woman of the left, responds, said, oh, no, it's revolutionary and radical. Then Leader McConnell joined me yesterday, Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, and all things Hillsdale are found at hillsdale.edu, to talk about the fact that it is an inconvenient truth that this court is only radical to the left because it stopped being radical for the left. Do you agree with that assessment?
Oh, yeah. And, one of the greatest things to appear in the Supreme Court opinion in modern times is the concurrence of the very great Clarence Thomas, who gives a history of all that as regards affirmative action. And it is parallel. First of all, it's a legal and philosophic and historical account of that issue, tracing all the way back to the Declaration of Independence and beyond. It's a tour de force, in my opinion. And one of the greatest court opinions I've ever read, and several that I've read are by him. But one of the things he says, it's by the way, it's terribly like Lincoln's Peoria speech, which gives a concise, brilliant history of the movements and attitudes to slavery.
Wait a minute. I am familiar with Cooper Union. I am not familiar with Peoria. I am not embarrassed to admit because I never mind being dumb. What was the occasion of that speech? When was it given?
That was given in 1858, and it's the story, because, see, it's exactly like now slavery was. Slavery had been around for a long time. it was only recently, relatively recently, let's say since about 1820, and Lincoln gives the speech 38 years later, 38 years later, it's only then that some people began to say that slavery is a good thing and justified. And before that, not at all. And the ones who did say it, even then, they were kind of shy about it, right? Because they had to make all this, the full-throated pro-slavery people, they had to make arguments in two extremes. And in one extreme, it's that this is good for them. They're a simple people, and they thrive when they have the proper direction. And in the full extreme, and these two arguments are really only forms of one another, they're not really quite human. And that's what was hard to deny.
Which one was Calhoun's primary argument? Because he is the original sin, originals theologian. Which did he embrace?
Well, both, kind of. He spoiled his case, and there's a speech he gives called the Oregon speech, which is in our Constitution reader. And in that speech, he says it's good for them, and he says that it would be an abomination for us to live with them as equal citizens because they're not the same kind of thing we are. And that's the problem. See, that's Hitler. What did the Nazis say about
Jews are
killing
subhuman?
all the Jews?
Yep, they're subhuman.
Well, the first thing is they didn't say a lot about killing them all, right? They were a little embarrassed about it.
Oh, they hid that. Oh, yes.
Yeah, but what their case was like that. They're not fit, they're diminished, or they're inhuman. And it was only the extreme argument that they're inhuman, but that was made. You can see the argument in the Wannsee Conference, where Heydrich and Eichmann and the Hard Boys, they persuade a bunch of bureaucrats. It's a very kind of modern bureaucratic meeting, right? All the agencies of this and the administrators of that, all working out their cooperation with their various agencies. Without
really saying what they're about.
Well, they get to it, and some of them are threatened, and it's like the Nazis. They're on the one hand surreptitious; they don't want this known. And but here's what they did. It's the reason we know what it said in the conference. They of course kept very careful notes.
They're Germans.
But then they kept a register, and everybody the sets of notes were all numbered, and everybody who took a set had to sign his name, so we know who was there. But then they were also obliged to destroy the notes after a time, after they'd learned them. And so one person didn't, and so we have those notes.
Dr. Arnn, let me pause for a moment. Martin Gilbert was your professor, the greatest biographer that England has produced, and he chose to live the rest of his life in Israel when he was done with his work in England. My question is, did you ever sit down and talk with him about the perversion of the German intellect, what happened? Did he ever come to grips with what happened?
Oh, yeah. He wrote books about it. We talked about that stuff all the time. And he spent a lot of time in Israel, but he never lived there full time.
Oh, I thought he moved there at the end of his life.
He had
he had an apartment.
And, he went a lot, and the place was glorious. It was in sight of the Temple Mount and the Dome of the Rock. But no, that was, and I am trained by two Jewish teachers in the main, Harry Jaffa and Martin Gilbert, and they're very different kinds of guys, but, friends and close in a way, close through me mainly. But Harry Jaffa wrote all about the twists and turns of philosophy that produced these crazy ideas. Modern scientific materialism and historicism is what it is, in its various vile forms, including those extant in America today.
Well, that brings us back to affirmative action, because the last extant exercise of sort of race-based, eugenic-like thinking is in the bureaucracies of people so attached to affirmative action they are unaware of what they are saying about the people whom they are, quote, acting on affirmatively?
Well, they want to, there's a lot going on there in the psychology. By the way, these opinions, if you want to, you could just make a complete textbook on
yes
modern race relations out of the what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 opinions in that case, because the disagreements among them are fundamental, and I think unusually for the court, they argue with each other a lot.
Explicitly, yes.
And they pick up each other's points, and so it's a great thing, and it takes some work, because, as I say, Thomas's opinions is, I think, the longest of them. It is long, but it's comprehensive, and he is thorough in his criticisms of Sotomayor and what's her name, the new one,
Kagan and Brown Jackson, Jackson
it.
Brown. Brown Jackson, Justice Brown Jackson.
Brown Jackson, yeah. She's and what's at stake is the status of the human being, right? Because just remember, our country is glorious in so many ways, and one of them is it begins with an account of the human being. It even outlines its relationship to God and above the beasts, and so beneath God and above, and so it's a divine critter, and it has characteristics that make it entitled to its freedom, and those characteristics are located in its soul. Now, it doesn't use that word in the Declaration, but that means that because we can have objective knowledge of things around us in a richer and deeper and more fundamental way than any other creature, and because we can talk freely about that with each other, that means whatever we can say, we can think, and whatever we can think, we can say. That means we're very closer than any other being. Then certain rights come to us, and those rights are to think and to talk and to choose among the options, which we can see the options and evaluate in a different way than any other critter. And so that is all in that beautiful, 2,000-word document, the Declaration of Independence. That's all laid out, right? And it's the first nation, remember, that does lay that out, and then everybody who has that nature, every human being, is entitled to the rights proper to it, found in its nature. And so that's an argument, right? And if you want to see that argument summarized as regards race, read Clarence Thomas's opinion.
And I want to pause. The Chief Justice has, for as long as he's been on the court, said the way to end discrimination based on race is to end discriminating based on race. He's the succinct version. Clarence Thomas is the long version. But what's going on there, as Dean Spalding and I talked about last week, is fundamental to understanding the modern university. And what the court did, I'm just curious, do you consider it in any way impactful on Hillsdale? Because Hillsdale doesn't do this stuff, but every other university does. Yeah,
well, it's, and the reasons, I tried very hard to explain this to the lady from the New Yorker, and she got part of it, but what you have to do in university, now that's a special thing, right? It's not, every human community is not a university, and it's not like all the others in every respect. But what you have to do in a university is you have to treat everyone equal.
Yep.
They are going to cooperate on a very profound level. And so they must have, the first paragraph of Aristotle's Politics says, every community aims for some good. If it aims for more than one or any incompatible one, then it's not a community anymore. And so, and if you hold this view, which we have always held at Hillsdale College, fought and died for, and articulated over 180 years now, is every human being is capable of learning. And so that, you don't come to a college to represent anything. except the wish of the human being to know the best things.
Oh, would that were the goal of every college and university. When we come back, we're going to talk about the court's direction to every college and university out there. Don't go anywhere except to hillsdale.edu or over to Apple iTunes where all the Hillsdale Dialogues, 800 plus of them, are collected, or to hughforhillsdale.com. But I really do, if you're a kid or you're a parent, you got to get that application in early and you got to work on it, hillsdale.edu. And by the way, we'll be back on the world crisis next week. Do not despair. The Churchill Project is also over at hillsdale.edu. And we'll tell you more about that next week. And I'm coming back to talk about the court right after this.
Hey, it's Scott Bertram, and I want to tell you about something new from Hillsdale College. It's the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. Check it out right now. Go to podcast.hillsdale.edu. The Hillsdale College Podcast Network offers free nationwide access to all of Hillsdale's podcast content. That means shows like the Hillsdale Dialogues, the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, the Larry P. Arnn Show, and now, new, the Imprimis Podcast. You can listen wherever you are and whenever you want, and it's always free. Find out more about all of our shows at podcast.hillsdale.edu. You can subscribe to any program with new episodes delivered right to your device. Or sign up for the super feed. That means you get access to absolutely everything posted on the site. If you want to come close to stepping inside a Hillsdale College classroom, well, the Hillsdale College Podcast Network is for you. Get informed and get entertained at podcast.hillsdale.edu. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Dr. Larry Arnn is my guest, president of Hillsdale College. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. Justice Thomas is a friend of President Arnn's, and he's been under attack by the left. I wonder if the left will stop now that it's been revealed that Justice Sotomayor was shaking down colleges and universities to sell her books to the tune of $3.7 million in royalties over 13 years. What did you think of that story, Dr. Arnn?
What do I think of that? I don't think it's wrong for a Supreme Court justice to sell books.
I agree.
And so the court has published a defense of her, and I think that's fine.
It's all nonsense on stilts. Sam Alito going fishing, Clarence Thomas going out with Harlan Crow, Justice Sotomayor selling books. It's all nonsense on stilts to delegitimize the court and pave the way for expanding it, which will be the end of the rule of law in America. That's a dire statement. Do you agree with me?
That's right. And so in other words, the left is not going to settle down. They're going to try to change the court. And, they're not going to try to do it in the patient way, which is win a bunch of elections. Over time, by the way, we talked about the Israeli court. Our court is subject to the popular will, but not immediately. And so they want immediate, right? And that's you're right about that. And because all these cases that have come up lately involve the fundamental status of the human being, and there's a sharp disagreement about that. And if it's true in the imagination of the left that we are basically constructs to be molded by the society around us, and whatever we are, the factors outside our reason and our moral intention are decisive, then that's an unlimited state that can go to work on that, right?
And that's why they're so frantic, Dr. Arnn. The beating heart of the left is the administrative state. And the beating heart of the beating heart is the education bureaucracy, especially at elite colleges and universities, stamping out their like-minded people to go forth and control the world from their administrative agencies. And this court is having none of that. And boy, they're going to chop it up and take it back to splinters. And they are not moving fast enough for my taste. Do you think they're moving fast enough?
No. Well, the majority are serious about, for example, in Roberts' opinion, the jurisdiction of the court on this student, whatever it is, fair admissions against somebody, they attack the standing the member organization Students for Fair Admissions.
Yes.
And he takes trouble. Roberts takes trouble with that. And his defense or his assertion that they are a proper plaintiff in the case, it hangs on a bunch of court cases that have been the doctrines of the court over a long time, right? In other words, we are proceeding according to the standards that exist. They're fountain in the Constitution, and they're springs in many court cases that have come later and legislation. So in other words, he takes trouble to show that this is proper under the proper standards of the court. And that's the right attitude. And that means, by the way, courts can't, they only take cases, right? They never initiate anything.
They have no roving commission to find wrong and undo it.
That's right. And so I'm thankful for that and expect that they will continue to observe that. And remember, it just takes changing 2 votes to change a lot, everything. And 1 vote would change a lot. So this is not some permanent situation here now. It's just an unusual situation as compared to most the last generation or 2.
I do think it is unusual in regards to this. I don't know that they're ever going to be able to leave history and tradition again. The Roe era, the Roe-Bakke era, was 50 years of incoherence. And Justice Scalia used to say we just get deeper and deeper into the woods of abortion jurisprudence. It distorts everything else. I don't think America wants to go back to that, Dr. Arnn.
Well, yeah, I mean, abortion is, the abortion political problem has been let loose upon the country in a different way now. And it's not entirely clear to me how that's going to play out. But
Agreed.
I'm very much of the view, as the court says, that that's how it should play out. That you can't have an incoherent decision by a split court to decide the questions of life and death for the unborn for all time.
Yeah,
so
once and for all
generations.
generations, it doesn't work.
That's right. And you're never going to get a satisfactory conclusion that way. And my own view and hope is that public opinion is very against late-term abortion. And the next thing is to make that extremely uncommon. And,
I agree with you completely. Next week, we're back, America, on the world crisis. We just wanted to dip into con law because Leader McConnell was on yesterday, so Dr. Arnn and I thought we'd cover it today. But next week, Chapter 2 of the world crisis. Don't miss it. The week thereafter, Chapter 3. Stay tuned to this great station. Thank you, Dr. Arnn. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.